In today's tutorial, we are going to take our gameplay to the next level by adding a slow motion pause system that lets you freely explore the scene while everything else is slowed down. You can use it for photo mode or when the player opens the inventory menu. Let's start by creating a project using the third-person template. I recommend enabling the starter content so we can use the fire particle you saw in the intro, but this step is totally optional. Next, give your project a name and create it. Whenever I start a new project, my first step is to always open the editor settings and set the asset open location to the main window. It helps keep things organized. Now for the first task, let's create an input action for pausing the game. I want this to trigger only once when the player presses the button. After that, we'll add this action to the input mapping. And assign some keys to it. I'll be using the P key and the pause button on the keyboard, but you can also add controller buttons if you'd like. Now we need to create a player controller to handle everything related to switching between modes. This controller has an event called onPauses, which triggers every time it pauses a new pawn. What I want to do is get the class of the pawn it pauses, and by comparing it to the default pawn class in the game mode, we can check whether it's the default pawn or not. First, we'll validate the game mode. Then we can grab the default pawn class and compare it to the paused pawn. If they are the same, we'll store that information in a variable, but only if that variable hasn't been set already. To track the current mode, I'll create a new variable called paused to store the game state. Adding the input action to this class is easy. You can just drag and drop it from the content browser. Each time the input action is triggered, we'll toggle the pause variable. We can quickly test this by printing the value. But before we do that, don't forget to set this controller class in the game mode. As you can see, each time I press the P button, the value changes. However, if I press the dedicated pause button on the keyboard, the entire game goes into the pause mode, which we don't want. To fix this, we need to unbind the pause button from the editor. Just go to the editor settings, search for pause, and remove that button. Let's test it again. This time, you should be able to use the pause button without freezing the whole game. Next, I want to create a pawn class that allows us to move freely when the game is paused or in photo mode. The first component we'll add is a capsule collision to prevent the camera from passing through objects. You can make it the root component by dropping it on top of the current root. A size of 32 is a good balance for keeping a proper distance from objects. And be sure to set its collision preset to block all. The second component is the spring arm, which acts as the camera boom. Don't forget to enable use pound control rotation on this component. The arm length can match the collision radius, ensuring the camera stays outside of the collision area. Next, we'll add the camera itself. And finally, the last component is the floating pound movement, which lets us move around easily. It's super simple to implement, but using this component helps us save time. Let's start by going to the third-person character and copying its input actions for movement, since we need the same functionality but with a few small tweaks. Now let's head back to the player controller and add the functionality to switch between pawns. I'll create a new function to switch to the pause pawn. We can call when the game is paused. First, we need to check if the default pawn is valid. I'll also add an output to confirm if the function runs successfully. After that, I'll search for the default pawns camera component and if it's valid, we'll use it and promote it to a local variable. This way, we can get its location to use as the spawn point for the pause pawn. To spawn the pause pawn, I'll use the spawn actor node and promote the spawned pawn to a variable. This way, next time we don't need to spawn it again, we can just reuse it. If the variable isn't valid yet, we'll spawn the pause pawn. For the pawns transform, we'll use the camera's location and the control rotation. Next, we'll set the owner of the pause pawn to this controller class, but we can set the instigator since that has to be a pawn class. Don't forget to set the collision handling to always spawn. If the pause pawn is valid, all we need to do is set its location and rotation. And make sure the teleport option is enabled. Finally, we'll ask our controller to possess the new pawn. And return success from the function. In the next step, if the game isn't in the pause state, I want the controller to take the control of the default pawn class. Let's test it out and see how it goes. As you saw, after pressing the button, we switch to the pause pawn, allowing us to move freely around the level. Now let me keep it in this place and show you a potential issue. When I switch back to the default pawn and try to walk over this slope, the pause pawn gets in the way. Let me use the show collision command so you can see the invisible pawn causing the problem. To fix this, we can go to the pause pawn and use two events that trigger each time a controller takes control or leaves a pawn. When the pawn is possessed, I want to enable actor collision. When it's unpossessed, we'll disable collision. That should fix the issue. But let me show you another problem. When I try to move up or down, it doesn't work. I can only move forward at the same height, regardless of the camera's rotation. This is an easy fix. We need to account for the pitch when calculating the forward vector. Let's try again. As you can see, I can now fly around the level as expected. But there is one more issue. If I try to move vertically while staying in the same spot, it doesn't work. To fix this, we need to create a new input action, which I'll call vertical move. The type should be axis 1D, and we can also add the SMOS modifier to it. Now let's add this input action to the input mapping and assign some buttons. I'll add a negate modifier to the Q key so it moves down. Next, add this new input action to the pause pawn. And we'll use the same input node as before. To ensure it only moves up or down, we'll set the Z component of the vector to 1 and the rest to 0. Let me add a comment to this section and use the same comment color as the other movement nodes to keep things consistent. Now if we tested it out, you'll see that the vertical movement works perfectly. Now it's time to add the slow motion effect. Head back to the switch pawn function and search for set global time dilation. If you set this to 0, everything will completely freeze, but using a small value keeps the scene moving just in slow motion. Next, on the pause pawn, call set custom time dilation. We want to keep the time value for the pause pawn at the 1, so it moves normally while everything else slows down. If you multiply 200 by the value I used for the global time dilation, you'll get the right number, which is 1. But there is an even better solution. If we promote the global time value to a variable, we can simply divide 1 by this value to get the exact number. We need to keep the pause pawn's time at 1. This way, we won't have to manually calculate it. Finally, when we switch back to the default pawn, we'll reset the global time value to 1. Let's test it while the character is in the air. As you can see, I can freely move around, and the character still has a bit of movement. When I switch back to the normal mode, everything works just as normal. Let's add validation for the default pawn before running this section. When the player switches back to normal mode, I want to add a camera fade effect to make the transition feel smoother. To do that, add the Get Player Camera Manager node and call Start Camera Fade on it. I'll set a small value for the fade duration, and I want to hold the fade when it finishes so the screen stays black for a moment. Next, add a delay node that lasts twice as long as the fade duration. After the delay, we'll call the fade function again to reset the camera to normal. This time, we'll change the alpha value from 1 to 0, since the first fade went from 0 to 1. For this node, we'll use the same duration, but this time we don't need to hold the fade. To prevent the player from pressing the pause button while the screen is fading, I'll add a boolean to track whether the fade function is running or not. Before the delay node, I'll set it to true, and at the end, I'll set it back to false. We'll also need to check this variable whenever the player tries to pause the game to make sure they can trigger it while fading. Now let's test it out. It seems there was a problem. The fade happens after switching the cameras. The issue is that I need to pause the default pawn while the screen is black. So let me move the pauses node to after the delay. Let's test it again. And this time it works perfectly. Now let's add a fire particle to the level. If you hover over its name, you'll see its class is emitter. Next, we'll go back to the switch pawn function and find all the emitter classes in the level. We'll set a custom time dilation on them so they stay active during the pause. The pause pawn has a custom time value that keeps its speed normal, but I want the emitters to play at half speed. To do that, we'll simply divide the custom time value by 2. Before testing, let me move the fire next to a wall so we can jump from there and get a nice view of the scene. As you can see, the character and potentially every other actor in the level are in slow motion, but the pause pawn allows us to move freely and the fire is playing at half speed. The only thing left is to reset the custom time dilation of the emitters back to 1. To do this, we'll just copy the same nodes and place them after resetting the global time dilation. We just need to set it back to 1, and we'll continue the code once the loop is completed. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. Don't forget to check out my Monday Market Day series, where I review Unreal Engine Marketplace assets every week. I'm also planning to update the format to fit the new Fab platform, so stay tuned for that.